This is the story of Margaret, a mother whose quiet love shaped 3 young lives. She worked long nights at a small table under a single yellow light, sewing until her eyes felt heavy. She gave up her own dreams so her children could have a better future. Margaret felt proud when she watched them grow, and she believed her sacrifices were worth it. But time passed, and her old house slowly fell silent. The rooms held memories, not voices. Margaret often sat by the phone, waiting, telling herself they were busy with their own lives. She felt a small ache in her chest, but she pushed it away. Her children did not know it yet, but one day they would learn the truth. There was a moment when her phone stopped ringing forever. When Margaret was younger, her days were long and her nights were even longer. She sat beside an old sewing machine until midnight, guiding the cloth with tired hands. The soft sound of the machine filled the small house like a quiet song. Margaret felt hope each time she worked, even when her fingers ached. She looked at her children sleeping on the bed and felt a warm peace in her heart. In those moments, Margaret promised herself that they would have a better life than she did. She believed love meant giving everything and asking for nothing back. Time moved on, and the past slowly faded into silence. The sewing machine now stood in the corner, covered with a thin layer of dust. The house felt too big and too quiet for one person. Margaret often walked from room to room, touching old chairs and faded photos. In other cities, her children lived busy lives. Mark listened to the sound of a keyboard all day. Lucy woke up to phone alerts and travel plans. David heard laughter and noise from his own children. Margaret felt proud of them, but the silence around her grew heavier each day. One evening, Margaret held her phone and stared at the screen. A thought crossed her mind, and she typed a short message about feeling tired. Her thumb stopped. Margaret felt afraid of being a burden. She deleted the words and placed the phone face down. She told herself they were busy, and she waited in the quiet house again. Margaret felt tired that morning. A deep cough stayed in her chest and did not leave. She rested her hand on the table and waited for the feeling to pass. It did not. Margaret felt a quiet worry and thought about her children. She told herself she should not complain, but her breath felt short. After a long pause, she picked up the phone. Her fingers shook a little as she searched for the first number. Mark answered while looking at a screen full of numbers. He did not look up. Margaret spoke softly and tried to sound calm. Mark listened for a moment, then sighed. "Mom, I'm sorry," he said. "Hospital bills are very expensive. Things are tight right now." He rubbed his temples and checked the time. Margaret felt a small drop in her heart. She said she understood and ended the call. Mark stared at the screen for a second, then moved his mouse and went back to work. Margaret waited, then called Lucy. Lucy was choosing a seat on a plane and smiling at her phone. She spoke fast and bright. "Oh, Mom," Lucy said. "I really need this vacation. I worked hard all year. I promise I'll visit when I get back." Lucy tapped the screen and laughed at a message. Margaret felt proud of her daughter and did not ask more. She said she was fine and ended the call. Lucy slid her phone into her bag and turned back to the flight screen. Margaret took a breath and called David. The sound of children filled the line. Toys hit the floor. David listened and closed his eyes. "Mom," he said, "you know it's a 6-hour drive. I can't just leave my wife and the kids. Maybe next month." He looked at his son and felt tired. Margaret felt the weight of his words. She told him it was okay and ended the call. David watched his children for a moment, then stayed where he was. Margaret placed the phone down and walked to the window. Children played outside and laughed. She watched them and felt a warm memory rise. She moved to the old cabinet and took out a photo. 3 small faces smiled back at her. Margaret felt a gentle hope and spoke to herself. "They are just busy," she thought. "They have their own lives now. They are good children." She smiled weakly and believed it, because she wanted to. A few days later, Mark started a group call. His voice was firm. "Someone needs to do something. he said. Mom can't be alone. Lucy frowned and crossed her arms. Don't put this on me, she said. My flight is in 3 days. Mark, you live the closest. Mark leaned back and raised his voice. Being close doesn't mean I have time, he said. I have a big project. David, what about you? It's your turn. David looked away and lowered his voice. It's easy for you to say, he said. I have 2 small kids. Why don't we hire a nurse? Mark shook his head. A nurse? He said. Do you know how expensive that is? The call ended with no plan. In her house, Margaret knew nothing about the argument. She walked into the kitchen and filled the kettle with water. Her hands trembled as she poured the tea into an old cup. She sat in the chair and stared at the empty wall. The room felt still. The children had their reasons. But sickness did not wait for reasons. And another phone call was coming. A call that no one was ready for. Mark saw a missed call on his phone during a meeting. He glanced at the name and thought he would call back later. He placed the phone face down and picked up his pen again. Minutes passed. Then all 3 phones rang at the same time. The number was not their mother's. It was a neighbor's voice, low and urgent. Your mother is in the hospital, the voice said. She collapsed. Mark dropped his pen, and it rolled under the table. He stared at the floor and felt his chest tighten. Lucy looked at her screen, and the words blurred before her eyes. She held the phone with both hands and did not speak. David sat still on the sofa, his body heavy, the noise around him fading away. At the hospital, they met in a quiet hallway. No one knew what to say. A doctor walked toward them and spoke softly. Your mother kept saying she didn't want to be a burden to you. The words stayed in the air. The 3 children looked at each other. In that moment, their excuses fell away, and a cold silence filled the space between them. A few days later, the phone rang again. Mark answered, and his hand froze. The voice from the hospital spoke slowly. We are sorry. Your mother has passed away. The words fell, and the line went quiet. No one spoke. Mark felt the room spin, and he sat down hard. Lucy held her breath and stared at the wall. David closed his eyes and pressed his lips together. For a long moment, there was only silence, heavy and still. Then they drove back to the old house. Everything looked the same. The chairs stood in place. The clock ticked. Only Margaret was missing. No one moved for a long moment. They began to clean in small steps. Lucy opened drawers and folded clothes. Her hands moved without sound. In the bedroom, she found a small wooden box under the bed. She called Mark. He took the box and felt its weight. Mark knew deep down that this was not just wood. His fingers shook as he lifted the lid. He took a slow breath before opening it, as if time could pause. Inside, there was a note and a savings book. Lucy read the note aloud. For my dear children, just in case. Mark opened the book. The numbers were clear and large. Enough for hospital bills. Enough for trips. Enough for every excuse they had made. Lucy sank to the floor, her knees giving way. Her quiet sobs broke the room. Mark stood still, tears running down his face. David turned away, his shoulders shaking, and the house fell silent again. The money did not bring peace. It felt like a heavy sentence that stayed with them. Mark sat at the table and stared at the savings book. He counted numbers all his life, but now the numbers hurt. Mark knew deep down that his mother was never a financial burden. He felt the truth settle in his chest. He realized that his cold distance was the real cost. Lucy held her phone and scrolled through old photos. Beaches, hotels, smiling faces. The screen felt bright, but empty. Lucy felt a sharp shame and closed the app. She thought about the times she said she worked hard. A quiet thought crossed her mind. She knew those moments could not come back. David stood by the window and watched his children play. Their laughter filled the room. He felt a sudden pain and turned away. David understood he used his family as a shield. The silence between the 3 grew deep, and regret stayed with them, steady and real. No one said sorry. There was no one left to hear it. The 3 sat on the floor of the old house, surrounded by their mother's things. Boxes stayed open, photos rested against the wall. Mark felt a tight weight in his chest and looked down at the worn carpet. Lucy sat close, her hands empty, her eyes low. David stayed quiet, breathing slow, listening to the clock tick. Mark reached for an old wool blanket and lifted it with care. He placed it over Lucy's shoulders without a word. Lucy felt the warmth and leaned her head against his arm. She closed her eyes and stayed there. David moved closer and placed a hand on Mark's shoulder. The touch was light, but it stayed. In that small circle, they shared the truth. It was a simple act, a silent apology for each other, and for the mother they lost. They accepted their fault together, in the quiet they once ignored. 1 year later, life looked different for them. It was quieter, but it felt deeper. Mark drove 6 hours to visit David more often now. He did not do it from duty. He wanted to be there. On the road, Mark felt time slow down. He thought about his mother and knew deep down that showing up mattered more than words. When he arrived, he sat on the floor with the children and listened. He stayed longer than before. Lucy spent many weekends at the old house. She turned a small corner of the yard into a garden. She planted flowers with careful hands and watered them in the early morning. Lucy felt calm as she worked. A thought crossed her mind each time she touched the soil. She believed her mother would have liked the colors. The garden grew, and so did Lucy's patience. Once a month, they met there together. They talked less and listened more. They shared simple meals and small stories. In the garden, they opened an old photo album. Pages turned slowly. Faces from the past looked back at them. They did not laugh loudly. They smiled in a soft way, with wet eyes and steady breaths. In those moments, they felt close. They learned their lesson in the hardest way, and they carried it forward, quietly, together. The story left a quiet lesson behind. Life moved fast, and days filled up before people noticed. Everyone thought there was more time, but time kept moving on. The clock did not stop for love or good plans. As people grew older and busier, they often forgot that parents were growing old too. The greatest gift was never money or big moments. It was time, attention, and simple care. A short call mattered. A visit mattered. Waiting felt easy, but waiting cost more than anyone expected. Value became clear only when a chair stayed empty and the room stayed quiet. Margaret's story is a painful reminder. People often say the opposite of love is not hate. It is indifference. In a digital world, you might send a text instead of making a call. You might promise next time because your calendar feels full. These habits feel normal, but they slowly create distance. You might believe in quality time. Big trips and special days sound important, yet small, steady moments matter more. Margaret did not need a long vacation. She needed a simple phone call and a few kind words. You might also carry good excuses. Work feels heavy, money feels tight, distance feels real. Each excuse seems small, but together they build a wall of neglect. You might say you love someone, but love shows in action. Love is a verb. It needs effort and presence. Here are 3 small steps you can take today. First, open your calendar and plan a 15-minute call with someone you care about, just to listen. Second, when you say, "I'm busy," add a clear plan. "I'm busy now, but I'm free on Wednesday evening." Third, share a happy memory with them. It costs nothing, and it means everything. As the story ended, the room felt quiet again. The narrator invited the listener to pause and reflect. What is one beautiful memory you have of your mother or a loved one? The comments can become a place of love and gratitude. If you feel like sharing, you can write that memory below. If words feel hard, you can simply type one word, mom, dad, or family. If this story brought someone to mind, typing "family is everything" is also a gentle way to share that feeling. Thank you for listening until the end. If stories like this help you think and feel, subscribing to Peak English Stories and liking the video truly helps. Take care, and be kind to one another.